All right, welcome back and many thanks for staying with us right here on the #1 breakfast show in the country, Morning at NTV. I'm Romeo Busiku. I'm always excited to be in your midst disseminating this information. The budget is the most important development instrument that government uses to transform the economy, and as such, it is critical that when government is preparing its national budget, the planning and budget process are #1, inclusive, #2, participatory and gender responsive, #3. To help us look at the hits and misses in the budget that's coming up for reading in this new month, we have Mr. Moses Mushime, is a program officer in charge of economic inclusion and fiscal policy program at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. A very good morning, sir. How are you, sir?
Morning to you.
How do you do?
Good.
First of all, you has looked at this document, the budget document. What should we look forward to?
Well, the budget has provided for a number of things. Particularly, the priorities are in three sectors.
Indeed.
Or programs, for that matter. We've seen the Human Capital Development Program bagging around 7.5 trillion shillings, which is, of course, good, but we are not yet there.
For NDP3, yes.
Exactly. And that includes health, education, and water for production, as well as social protection.
Yes.
Of course, we've been seen, and that has been consistent. A lot of money also around 6 trillion is going to security and governance, as well as around 5 trillion going to infrastructure. So those are the three key priorities in the budget.
Three of which are also highlighted in the NDP3.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
But over the years, we've seen a consistent decline in terms of providing for social protection, which is very important,
Especially during this pandemic.
During the pandemic, where we know that over 2.6 million people may descend into poverty. So we need to see government also balancing, to strike a balance between infrastructure and social protection, and that is very important.
And it seems like you didn't see this taking center stage in this budget document.
Exactly. Our social protection coverage has been low. In fact, in the region.
What does that mean? Does that mean that the officials are telling us lies? The Junior State Minister in charge of planning in the Finance Ministry, David Bahati, told us that the debt is increasing on account of increased borrowing to cushion the country from the socio-economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Yet, when the money comes out, you don't see much going to this response that they use as an excuse to borrow.
Exactly.
So what are we looking at? Lies?
That's, I could say, a total lie. For example, let's talk about the economic stimulus package.
Please do.
The government borrowed from multilateral financial institutions, including the World Bank, including the IMF, on account of providing credit, on account of providing stimulus packages for businesses that are struggling because of COVID.
Indeed.
But when you look at the subsidiary agreement between, for example, Uganda Development Bank and Ministry of Finance, that is not what the money that UDB got was meant for. UDB has consistently told us, we got money to finance key priority sectors in the economy, and that is agro-industrialization, that is manufacturing, and of course export promotion.
Meaning even the little money that came in to cushion the companies instead went to doing other things.
Exactly. But this money, they have consistently said, was not made to support struggling businesses. And that is very dangerous because they are going to close shop. Many people will become unemployed. And they will not be financially protected. And that is not good for the country.
And guess what? Yes, go ahead.
Especially where we know that our economic growth declined from the projections we had prior to COVID. We had projected the economy to grow at 6.5%. But in financial year 2019-2020, it grew to 2.9%. That is dangerous because our population is growing more than the GDP. So we are seeing more people descending into poverty.
And this is more worse news, more worse developments, Moses. The Minister of Finance, the Minister himself, that is Matia Kasaija, told us out of the 44.7 trillion Uganda shillings, 22.8 trillion Uganda shillings is going to be coming from domestic revenue, meaning the taxes that they've instituted. You remember Parliament instituted 7 new taxes. 70,000 on fish more, 30% on all rate of income. You remember all this, 12% on internet tax, There's a tax on our internet, 12%. So what we would like to know, how will they squeeze this money out of Ugandans who have not been cushioned by the same government from the effects of the pandemic? If the SMEs are struggling and they are down, how will government get this money back through the taxes? Because they intend to get, out of the 22.8 trillion shillings, they intend to get 20.8 from domestic revenue, these taxes, the 7 new taxes. Exactly. So how will they be able to do this if they are not helping companies stay afloat so that they could give back to the economy?
Exactly. You see, government, if the trend continues, to be shooting itself in the foot.
Yes.
But just to tell you that there is a small portion of Ugandans that pay taxes.
Indeed.
And these are the same people they are looking at. When you look at the informal sector that comprises of about 68% of working Ugandans,
yes,
it is barely taxed. And that is a very big challenge. So it is going to be a very big challenge for government to collect all this revenue. Already in this current financial year, we are seeing a shortfall of about between 2 to 3 trillion in terms of what they have projected to collect. And with the second wave of COVID coming, we don't see that changing. So it is possible that there will be underfunded priorities even in the next financial year if we do not support these businesses to grow, to recover, and therefore we collect taxes after that recovery or during the recovery process. So it is not enough to set out to collect taxes when businesses are struggling. Because URA and Minister of Finance in general, they have to facilitate business growth.
Is it poor planning? Is it poor priorities? Or they simply do not care? We've seen other countries, I'm telling you, Moses, what they are doing is cushioning companies so that they could come back to life and give back to the economy. Here, we are not giving them a stimulus package. Yes, now we want to, squeeze more money out of them. What does that say about our planners?
I think we need to prioritize. Let me tell you, Uganda has the most generous tax system in East Africa.
I hear you.
A lot of exemptions, a lot of tax waivers. And all this means that we are collecting low taxes in terms of, for example, when you look at the tax to GDP ratio, we are at 13%. Kenya is at 18% of their GDP. So we need to close that gap first. That means that let's look at those who are not in the income, in the tax income bracket, bring them in the bracket, but also, but also look at these incentives that we are giving to investors. For example, in the minerals, we know that the mineral sector has weak links to market. They do not observe key human rights issues that affect workers. But these are the same investors that are getting these incentives. So in a way, you'll find that our tax system is even facilitating the illicit financial frauds outside the country.
Amazing.
And that is very important.
Amazing
and
insight.
Then the other issue is to bring these people in the informal sector into the tax bracket. And once we do that, of course, with expectation in oil revenue and all that, then in future Uganda could be able to finance its budget.
Before we get into the conversation on the skyrocketing public debt, which is at 65 trillion Uganda shillings, Junior State Minister for Finance in charge of planning, David Bahati, contends that it might increase to 51.9%. That is in the financial year 2021-2022. Before we veer into that conversation, I wanted to talk about another issue. That is the budget itself, whether it's going to be sufficient for many of the operations that are going to be helping the local government officials. Yes. At the local government level, is this budget money sufficient enough?
Well, we've, in the last 4 years, we've seen an increase in terms of allocation to the local government.
Indeed.
But when you look at that, it does not illuminate issues around equity in terms of distribution of national resources.
Indeed.
Before Local Government Act, that is around 1996,
yes,
local governments used to get more than 36% of the national budget.
Decentralization.
Exactly. Now, with the decentralization, of course, in the middle there...
When it still had meaning.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes.
In the middle there, then central government, MDAs pushed to decentralize the resources on the account that local governments were not efficient in terms of utilizing these resources. But in this current budget, we've seen allocation of around 4.6 trillion. That is an increment
Yes.
of around 2% from the previous year, which is ending in this month. But in terms of equitable allocation of resources, we've reduced, the local government's share has reduced from 36 in 1996 now to 14%. And we know that local governments are the heartbeat of service delivery.
Indeed.
They are providing public education, they are providing health care, they are providing water, they are providing all these community services, and therefore their share should be commensurate to how our revenues
Indeed.
are changing in terms of if for example, the national revenue is increasing, then we should that increase also shifting in the allocation of budget.
It should be reflected.
Exactly. And the other thing I have always said is that this budget is very restricted. We've had a scenario where the Minister of Finance provides indicative figures, budget indicative figures, within which local governments must operate in. And that means that they do not have a leeway or discretion, the discretion to budget for new and emerging issues that are coming from COVID-19.
Indeed. Speaking of the local government, Moses, yes, they also have the parish development model that they plan to use to do away with the 68% poverty levels in our households. Do you think it was really fair that agriculture, which is contributing 21% to our gross domestic product, is only getting that meager funding that it received in this budget? It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. You see, the parish model would work, but we've had a scenario of these enterprise programs coming and going, and over the years no one has told us what happened to these programs. We had Entandika, last year we had Myoga, now there has been a reversal, we are going to parish model, but when you look at the allocation of the monies going to the parish model, they cannot cause any significant or meaningful change.
Why?
First of all, there is no staffing at the parish level.
All right.
But secondly, we've had programs that have been hijacked. You find we have, for example, NADS. Now there is operational creation alongside it. And you wonder who is doing what. We have the parish model, but along the way it is going to be re-engineered to serve another agenda, which would be politics, for example. So that is, I think if it is brought in good spirit and it is to serve, then we need to see a lot of share, because that is where service delivery happens. For example,
yes.
Let me just be clear.
Please do.
There has to be a health center in every, at least a health center, although they are phasing out, but a health center at every parish. There has to be a school. Now, does every parish has a school? Does every parish have a health center? And this is where we should be going, because that is what it means by service delivery. So, and that is not reflected in this budget.
Let's talk about the 65 trillion shilling rising public debt. Yes, that is another conversation that is causing so many to talk. How best can we actually reduce this public debt? Because he contends that we might see the debt dwindle as we see domestic revenue trickle back into the economy, but then we are still borrowing for the all infrastructure projects within Hoima and so forth. Do you think we shall continue to borrow? And how best can we tame government's appetite for borrowing?
Well, the debt has risen, especially in the last year, where we had
from 49 to 65.
Exactly. And that has been quite enormous increment.
16 percentage points.
Exactly.
That is too much.
But you see, a government that does not generate enough revenue, whether it is tax or non-tax revenue, is bound to borrow. And we've seen it. For example, we have a 44.7 trillion budget, but out of that, only 22 trillion is local revenue, which is projected. So it means we have almost 50% of the budget which is not covered. So we are going to borrow in the next couple of years, maybe 5 years, especially since now we want to invest in oil and gas infrastructure. We do not have that money. So if the government is going to reduce on the debt trends, the only way is to see how to generate revenue domestically.
Indeed.
And that is broadening the tax base, not necessarily deepening it.
And that would happen by supporting the local SMEs.
Exactly.
Which they're not doing.
We have to support them. We have to support them. Of course, we saw in this, I think, previous year, where government deferred payments of taxes. It was VAT and pay, and that was good because it provided liquidity to the private sectors and SMEs. But when we are designing these policies, sometimes we leave out SMEs in general. Because if you say, for example, you are going to only defer tax payments to companies making, for example, over maybe 500 million per year, then you are leaving out those who are making less. And this is where majority Ugandans are. So we need to see you are facilitating these businesses. Of course, at the same time, taxing them. They should pay also the fair share of tax so that we get enough revenue to provide the government to provide services.
The biggest question, Moses Mushimi, is how best can we help government tame its appetite for borrowing? If you look at Amos Lugolobi, he is the chairman of the budget committee in Parliament, and he did mention that government needs to halt the creation of administrative units. Do you agree? Number two, he also said they should expedite the merger of institutions and all these statutory authorities and enterprises that are actually taking too much money, and do away with wasteful expenditure in that they won't be forced to borrow. Those are two recommendations coming in from the budget committee. But you, as an inclusive expert, what do you think should be done to tame government's appetite for borrowing?
Of course, like you said, fiscal consolidation is very important.
Indeed.
And we would see, of course, government merging some of the institutions. But there is another issue. There is a lot of wastage and duplication in our budgets. For example, we know that we've seen in papers the government, parliament, which is an arm of government, will be paying rent of so much money, 800 million per month. That is around 19 trillion per year, just to rent for MPs. They are going to buy them cars. All that is wastage.
Indeed.
We've seen, for example, government MDs implementing the same things. You find Uganda Investment Authority is building industrial zone. You find Ministry of Trade is building industrial zone. You find the Free Zone Authority is building industrial zones. And so they are all doing the same things. Of course, we've had corruption in this country at unimaginable levels.
Indeed.
All this is wastage. So we could all as well plan to live within our budget. But also once we borrow,
how efficient
is
will
there
this
return on investment on this date?
Indeed. Moses Mushimi, how let me see, how efficient will this budget be now that 30% of the same 44.7 trillion shillings is going to servicing a debt? 30% of the budget is going to be servicing this debt of 65 trillion shillings.
34%,
so
yeah, sure.
How sufficient will the budget be to handle other issues that are pertinent?
The budget is not sufficient at all. The government is constrained up to now. When you look at our expenditure, medium-term expenditure framework, vis-a-vis the budget we have, there is a deficit. In this, for example, when COVID set in, we had a deficit of around 2.5 trillion. Rather, 20 trillion plus.
Yes.
Isn't it? That has not changed. So there is a lot of deficit, and that means there won't be adequate service delivery at local service points.
Indeed.
And this is where local government is affected. We would want to see a shift, even in the budget. We know infrastructure is very important, but with COVID-19, there has to be a lot of investment in the social sector.
All right, thank you very much, Moses Mushimi. Indeed, a lot needs to be done. Sure. You had a 46.5 trillion budget in the last financial year. That is just concluded. This one that is concluded. Now you have a 44.7 trillion budget during a pandemic. Lesser money. Lesser money. So we expected more money now that we are in a full-blown pandemic to be in this budget, but then it's lesser money. Well, that's the insufficiency that we are talking about right here in Morning at NTV, and Moses Mushime couldn't have expanded more on this conversation in a great way. Mount Nyirangongo volcano, actually, for so many people to actually vacate their homes, 400,000 people are now out there scampering for safety in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We want to bring you the security situation at